Madam President.
Senator from Virginia.
Madam President, first of all, I want to thank my good friend, my colleague from Virginia, Senator Kaine, for appropriately saying to the balance of the Senate yesterday, this is not business as usual, and for objecting to us going into recess as 800,000 Americans, many of them who are working, and as we heard earlier this morning, many of them working overtime, are getting paychecks that have zero on them. Senator Kaine has probably already outlined where he just came from. I want to give the same comments, and I want to also thank the chair, because I know she has come to the floor as well and raised this concerns. We have a lot of debates here in the Senate, and there are legitimate policy differences we have. And part of our job is to resolve those. But part of our job should never be to shut down the enterprise of the greatest government in the world, the United States of America. And I think about Mr. Trump, who has spent a bunch of time going on TV and running to the border. My goodness, I just wish that Donald Trump or someone from his White House could have sat in the room that Senator Kaine and I just sat in with 15, 16 federal employees and just heard their stories. What we heard, and I'm sure Senator Kaine has already acknowledged this, is we heard from virtually all of them the fact that they viewed that public service and serving the government was a noble calling. Heard many of them who had been either Air Force or Army or Navy, who had served in our nation's defenses but felt that they were continuing to serve when they joined public service. We heard another person who works in one of the part of our government that I'm a little familiar with, but probably frankly not that much, that does investigations into chemical spills. It's a small, tiny agency, 40 professionals. There was a chemical spill in Houston a week ago, and no one has done any investigation about what the effects of that spill might be on that community. And she was sitting there saying, you know, somehow she doesn't feel like her job is non-essential. We heard from a young man who'd moved to Virginia just a few years ago, bought a house, thought he could get through one more mortgage payment, who helps approve food stamp approvals, and actually the grocery stores who apply to take in food stamps. So I think it's got 2,700 grocery stores during this period that are in the process of trying to get the approval to take food stamps, haven't got approval. And to say to him that somehow making sure that folks who are hungry in this country get food, that is a non-essential job, was both insulting and, frankly, a little bit demoralizing. To hear as well from, I can't recall which organization he works for, but someone who was saying, you know, understood that as a federal employee, when he came and joined the federal workforce, he gave up his right in many ways to organize, to strike. But he felt like, you know, he gave up those rights, but the deal was the government was going to pay him for his job. And that in many ways what's happening right now is kind of in labor terms the effect of the government locking out our workforce. And I don't want to steal Senator Kaine's thunder. He may have already mentioned this comment, but I thought it was, boy, oh boy, it was telling. We had a number of air traffic controllers there. And these folks are not only working without pay, but many of them are working overtime without pay. And with our air traffic controllers, about 35, 40% of them are at the eligible age of retirement today. They could throw it in, cash it in, say we're done. One of the things about the shutdown as well is we've been working for some time. Paul Rinaldi, the head of the air traffic controllers, you know, I would advise any member to go talk to him because he can scare the dickens out of you about the safety of our air system. But we've had a challenge for the last decade of making sure we replace those air traffic controllers. Well, the next class of air traffic controllers is shut down. And as Senator Kaine made mention, and I think Mr. Rinaldi made, Do you really want your air traffic controller who's working an 80-hour week overtime to be not spending 100% of his or her focus on keeping the skies safe, but is probably spending 20% of his mind thinking about paying the mortgage and another 10 or 15% of the time thinking about, can he pay his kids' tuition? Is that really what we want from folks who are tasked with such an important job? Now, due to the good work of Senator Kaine and others and the presiding officer, we passed, I think 2 days ago, the fact that all of our federal employees are going to get reimbursed. I think the House has passed it now as well, and the President has signed it. But let's not presume by any chance that that's going to make everybody whole. We heard from a lady this morning who hadn't saved very much, but had done what we would all urge, put some money away in her IRA. She's taking her money out of the IRA, paying the tax penalty of taking that money out so she can get by. She gets her back paycheck. That doesn't replace the penalty in taxes she paid on her savings. We had another person who took an advance on a credit card. We all know credit cards have some value, but it's not exactly, those rates are not cheap. If you take an advance against future pay from your credit card, and if you get even back pay, that's not going to make up for those penalties. And again, Senator Kaine may have mentioned this already. We in Virginia, I know in Alaska's got the same issue. We've got tens of thousands, not hundreds of thousands, of workers who are contractors who, even when we reopen the government, have absolutely no guarantee that they'll be reimbursed. Matter of fact, again, Senator Kaine may have mentioned this already. There was a veterans-owned small business contractor, had about 9 employees, who this week is probably going to shut down because he can't pay his workers. He maintained as long as he could, but couldn't continue to pay his workers. Or what about the folks who are never going to get the hours back, who work providing food services or cleaning up our buildings, who are the lowest paid employees, oftentimes contractors, who are never going to get those hours back, who are still going to be stuck with Christmas presents, but never get the income from that time? And the list goes on and on. It's not just, again, federal employees, contractors. Alaska and Virginia are both blessed with great heritage sites, great national parks. Shenandoah Valley, around where Senator Kaine lives, a lot of battlefields around Richmond. I'm sure the same in Alaska. There are a lot of private businesses that are the restaurants or campsites or other facilities that may not be on national park ground, but they get all their business from tourists who come during this, oftentimes during the holiday periods. Those folks get, even when we reopen the government, goose eggs. So I thank the presiding officer. I thank my friend from Virginia as well. I believe we will find a way to get this government reopened. My hope is that our colleagues, when they're home this weekend, will be refreshed by hearing from workers who are doing their jobs without pay, and that we will find a way to get this government reopened. But we should be very clear that the damage that has been done in terms of how Americans view all of us, regardless of where we are in this policy debate, how Americans view our federal government, how the rest of the world views us now that we have got this shutdown will, I believe by tomorrow, become the longest federal government shutdown in American history. I hope and pray that we'll all, maybe in the aftermath of stepping back, one, find a way to make sure that people who paid undue penalties, financial penalties, because through no fault of their own, the government shut down, we find a way to compensate them. That we can sort through how complicated the issue around contractors. And that for those private businesses who are around federal facilities, that we try to come to some kind of joint agreement that never again will we use a non-connected policy issue to hold hostage 800,000 folks who work for us and hundreds of thousands of others, and frankly, millions who depend upon these services going forward. We ought to find, and again, I may be being overly optimistic that somehow or the other that we'll get this resolved. But if we do, we ought to find those of us who are part of the groups that find common accord to put some marker down that we never, ever, ever do this again. And my closing comments, and I've got stories from a variety of Virginians here, and I know that the chair is going to want to get out of the chair at 1 o'clock, so I will submit these stories for the record. But I also hope, and as somebody who's been in the private sector longer than the public sector, and like my friend, my colleague from Virginia, we've both had the honor of being governors of Virginia. So we've both been in executive positions. We've both been in positions where we've had workforces. And I know as a business guy, you could tell how well a business would do on how you treated your workforce, because that's the most important asset you've got, your human capital. And if we think back over the last decade, even through tight financial times, we've found ways, and appropriately so, for our military to get funded. We've even found ways, I think irresponsibly, to dramatically cut our taxes, particularly for folks at the top. And every time we've had to try to make cutbacks, where we've made cutbacks has been in what we call domestic discretionary, which in English is things like the TSA, like air traffic controllers, like the Agriculture Department, like the Coast Guard. And each year, whenever we find we've cut those programs. Matter of fact, domestic discretionary spending is at the lowest percentage it's been since the 1960s. So we've asked all these folks who are furloughed, or being asked to work without pay, we've asked them to do more with less, which isn't great for the workforce morale. And now we've had a White House, and my gosh, I wish that somebody from the White House could have sat there today, because I would have loved them to have tried to explain how they ought to go back and negotiate with their landlords about the rent due, or how they ought to make do with a side job, or how they ought to do as some folks were doing, as I was going to report from some of the Virginians who are selling their personal possessions on eBay to pay the bills. The fact that this White House is willing to go to the border for a political photo op, the president's words, not mine, or get on television and blast his political opponents, but not be willing to send anyone from this administration to sit down and listen to the concerns of our federal workforce is disgraceful. So I thank, again, my colleague from Virginia for his great work on this. I think it is appropriate that we are in session today, raising these issues. I think the level of angst that's going to take place over the next 48 hours as more and more people get those paychecks with zero on it. We haven't seen anything yet, the kind of angst that we felt perhaps disproportionately in Maryland, Virginia, and the district. People are going to feel all over the country. We need to bring this government shutdown to an end. We need to put our workforce back to work. We need to make sure the services they provide are being applied in a way that makes our country safer. And we need to find a way to make sure that never, ever again will we use these folks' lives as what they are being used right now, their words, not ours, political pawns. They are more important, their jobs are more important, their lives are more important than the way they've been treated over these last 21 days. With that, Madam President, I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.